Welcome to the party. You found the Mouse Castle Lounge, the place to be for good times and great conversations from the world of Disney. The bar is open, your table is waiting, and drinks are now being served. Come on in. And now, here's your host, the keeper of the Mouse Castle Lounge, Tim Calloway.
Whew, it is good to be back. Damn. It is May 1st, 2018. I'm Tim Calloway, and 18 months ago, to the day, I made a depressing farewell to podcasting. I really listened to it. It sounds awful. I closed the door to the Mouse Castle Lounge, and I went all in pursuing a career in voice acting. It's that whole microphone thing. I really love being in front of a mic. Who knew? But I've been gradually making my way doing that. I do corporate work. I do internet videos, the occasional commercial, some e-learning. I don't do any animation or video games. You really kind of need to be in LA to make a go at those, and I like it in Vegas far too much, but I love what I do, and it really amazes me at this point in my life that I get to do that and make a living at it. Well, sort of make a living. It's a work in progress. There's still a lot of work to be done. But that said, if you need a voice actor for your business or product, please check out my voiceover website at vegasvoiceactor.com. There you go. I got the gratuitous plug out of the way. So back to podcasting. Long story short, what brought me back to the lounge was I missed it. I missed talking about Disney. I missed talking with creative people. And I really missed sharing it with you. And so about a month ago, I started making some inquiries, kind of, taking the temperature, taking the pulse, what have you, reaching out to people and talking to friends, talking to past guests in the lounge, talking to some potential future guests in the lounge, and just kind of seeing if it was a good idea to bring the Mouse Castle Lounge back. And I was kind of overwhelmed with the response, the enthusiasm that I got from people. It's like, oh, yeah, please bring the lounge back. We love to have it back. We can't wait to listen to it again. That was very gratifying. And so it didn't take me long to decide that, yeah, let's bring the Mouse Castle Lounge back. So here we are. I've pulled the dust covers off the furniture. I restocked the bar, and our first guest is here. He is a good friend of the Mouse Castle Lounge. He's a prolific author, especially when it comes to Disney history. His books include the Vault of Walts series, The Secret Stories of Walt Disney World series, Who's Afraid of the Song of the South, and The Book of Mouse. His latest book is Call Me Walt, Everything You Never Knew About Walt Disney. Ladies and gentlemen of Team Mouse Castle, oh yeah, we're back. So please welcome my guest, Jim Korkis, to the Mouse Castle Lounge. One of the great friends of the Mouse Castle, so happy to have him back. Jim Korkis, how you doing, sir?
Hey, Tim, I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy that Mouse Castle Lounge is back, too. I've missed it, and I'm sure many of your listeners have as well. It's always so much fun, and it's so informative, and I'm extremely flattered that you've invited me to return to the lounge.
Well, and I appreciate your eagerness to come back on the show. I don't know if you know this, but you have now broken the record. You have now appeared on the Mouse Castle Lounge more times than any other person that I've interviewed. I think I'm going to say you and DDA Gez were tied with like 5 appearances, but now you have 6. So I mean, I got to get DDA back on the show to.
Yeah, I know, and I thank you. I thank you for the punch too, because on my punch card here, I only need 4 more appearances, and I get a free set of mouse ears. So I'm looking forward to that.
That's right. It's mouse ears and a cocktail, too. Complimentary well drink from the bar. So.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
So, Jim, it's been like 2 years since you and I have talked. The question is, so what you been doing lately? No, your latest book.
Well, actually, I'm still writing books, and thank heavens people are still purchasing them, and of course, unless you're a Stephen King or a J.K. Rowling or whatever, you really can't make a living from books. But if each book sells a little bit, and you've got a couple of books out there, and each one makes a little bit, then it adds up, and you can pay those bills. So I'm very excited because in December, I got to release one of my dream books, which is Call Me Walt: Everything You Never Knew About Walt Disney, because I just get so frustrated that these people who weren't even alive when Walt Disney passed away are out there and speaking as if they're authorities, and they're just repeating all sorts of nonsense because, well, everybody knows that must be true, and it's not. And Walt lived such a rich life that there's so much left to cover that people aren't paying any attention to. Most people realize, well, Walt loved dogs, and some of your listeners probably could, even bring up some stories of some of the dogs that Walt had. Towards the end of his life, he had two poodles. He had this very large, full-size poodle called Duchess Disney, who he referred to as Dee Dee, and he just loved that dog, and she would go and sit with him, out in his barn in his backyard, and he'd even take her to the studio. And one time he took her to the studio, and he's in a meeting, and apparently some nuns were coming over to visit, and Dee Dee took a huge dump in the middle of the hallway, and the nuns had to pull up their habits a little bit and tiptoe around. And John Hench told me this story, and he rushed into Walt and told Walt this, and Walt's reaction was, "My dog? How do you know it wasn't one of the animators?" And when Dee Dee passed away, he got another little miniature white poodle that we sometimes see on the Disney TV shows with Walt, and he named her Lady, after Lady and the Tramp and all that.
Right.
But as a result of the dogs being so prominent, one of the myths that came out was, well, Walt doesn't like cats. And I talked with his daughter, Diane Disney Miller, and she said, no, he loved cats. He said at home he had this big brown leather chair he'd sit in, and the cat would come up and curl up in his lap while he was reading a script. And she told me this, and it's sort of a sad story about this one black cat they had called Manxie. Manxie, and Walt hated to do gardening. Walt hated to do gardening, so would always hire a gardener. Well, one time the gardener came over, and Manxie, while the gardener was doing work, crawled into the back of the truck and took a little nap. Well, when the gardener finished, he didn't look back there. He just pulled out, and Manxie woke up while he was in the middle of traffic and got scared and just leaped out, and they just never found her again.
Aww.
But that's one of the stories that we never hear about.
Mm-hmm.
But it's in the book, and again, it's based on people I talked to who actually knew Walt, and it's also based on I was able to do an awful lot of email communication and phone communication and all with Diane before she passed away, because she loved the writing that I did about her dad, because she said that I don't put him up on a pedestal as a saint. I treat him as a real person, but I'm honest about it. I don't do this tabloid type of stuff.
Yeah, and she was always very complimentary about your Vault of Walt series.
Oh yes, she loved that, and very supportive. And again, you don't want to abuse a friendship like that.
No,
but
no.
but but I would go to her, to always, double check things, and as a result, you run across all these other things, because again, the Disney family, and this includes Diane, they were very shy and they were very private. In fact, she told me that one of the things that irritated her is when they went out in public and people, were surrounding, her dad, and it was like, this is my dad.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking away from time I'm having with my dad. What are you doing? And she said, so she had to get over that sense of jealousy that the world loved him so much. One of the things that's in the book that I don't think a lot of people know about is, when you talk about hobbies, what do you think of, Tim? If I say, well, tell me a couple of Walt Disney's hobbies.
Trains and miniatures.
Yeah, you were right, but actually his real favorite, lawn bowling.
Get out of here.
Now, for those who are not familiar with lawn bowling, basically that's an outdoor sport. It's you're bowling on the green. There's this green pathway, and basically you're tossing these resin balls that are about the size of a grapefruit, and they're also sort of slightly lopsided. So it's it takes a little bit of skill. And what you do is you toss the ball to try to get as close as possible to the target ball.
It's like bocce ball, but it's on grass.
There you go. And so Walt started to take that up at his Palm Springs vacation home, Smoke Tree Ranch. That was, and he started that in the late 50s, early 60s. In fact, he was the one who designed the bowling green for Smoke Tree Ranch there, and he bowled on the teams. And then also in Beverly Hills, close to where his house was, he was part of the Beverly Hills lawn bowling club. And in fact, in '64, when he was flying to Washington D.C. to get that Medal of Freedom from Lyndon Johnson, he was a little delayed because he stopped over because he took his entire lawn bowling team to go to the championships in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And so he did that. And in fact, after Walt's death, here's something people don't know. After Walt's death, his Beverly Hills bowling lawn bowling group established an international Walt Disney lawn bowling tournament that exists to this day, and there is a 4-foot-tall perpetual trophy. And at the top is a golden foot-high Mickey Mouse figure, but at the bottom they have bronze Walt's 4 lawn bowling balls.
Oh my gosh!
Down there, and his daughter Diane said, he had a hand-tooled bowling bag. She said, but he thought the whole thing of championships were just silly, but he was having fun doing that. And in fact, shortly before his death, he was making arrangements to take some of the team members and their wives to an Australian lawn bowling tournament. So, my gosh, here's something we never knew about Walt Disney.
And this is something that kind of makes Call Me Walt, kind of sets it apart from other biographies about Walt Disney. And goodness knows there are many of them out there, Bob Thomas and Neil Gabler and Michael Berrier and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And more heading on their way,
Yes.
And again, as I tell people, this isn't a biography. There's plenty of those out there, as you pointed out. And there are some good ones out there. I still recommend the Bob Thomas, an American original. And the reason I recommend that is that Bob Thomas actually knew Walt.
Mm-hmm.
He was an Associated Press reporter, so he knew Walt, beginning from that. He worked with Walt. He did a children's biography, Walt Disney Magician of the Movies, where Walt set for 5 personal interviews about his life as a kid. And so, you pick up that book, and there's stories there that don't appear in any other Walt Disney biography. And Bob also worked on the original Art of Animation book. But why Walt Disney An American Original is so good is he had complete access to everything at the Disney studio, including people who have passed away. So other people like Gabler and all never got a chance to interview them. And he had complete access to the Disney family because they trusted him so much. So he was able to get all of this information. And in fact, because he was a reporter, he said, "Look, I'll only do this project if I have no restrictions. I don't want this to be a piece of puffery here, and all that." And both the family and the studio agreed. And so when you read American Original, he talks about Walt having a nervous breakdown and all that, but he doesn't dwell on it, like a National Enquirer or a TMZ or whatever would. He just mentions it. This is a fact, and then goes on, to the next fact. When he turned in the manuscript, the studio signed off on it, Walt Disney Productions signed off on it, and the family signed off on it, but Lillian Disney said, "I would like you to remove just 2 things." And again, the agreement was that, he wouldn't be asked to remove anything. But Bob removed those 2 things from the book. So when you buy a copy, buy the most recent edition, because those 2 things are now back in the book. What are the 2 things that Lillian Disney asked him to remove from the book?
You're asking me?
I don't know. Smarter than a Disney historian.
Right now I'm going to defer to the expert.
Okay. First off, she wanted removed the fact that Sharon was adopted.
Really?
Because again, she grew up. Lillian grew up during that time where there was that sort of cloud, over an adopted child. Even though it was quite common, in Hollywood. Burns and Allen, adopted a child. There were lots of celebrities who did that. But she didn't want Sharon identified as adopted because she felt it would make it, make her less authentic or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing she wanted removed, the year she was born. So we didn't know this until she died. Even her daughter didn't know this. Her daughter Diane didn't know this until after she died. She was 2 years older than Walt.
Right.
And so, again, it was from that time period where it would look like, she was a cradle robber or whatever. People just assumed, I just assumed, she was the same age as Walt or maybe a year or 2 younger. She was 2 years older than Walt.
And it's funny when you look at all the ground that is covered in Bob Thomas's book. I mean, in retrospect, I mean, obviously these were very personal things to Lillian, but looking back, it's really, that's all.
Yeah, that's it. And so you can see where Bob goes, hey, if that bothers you, that much, it doesn't make any difference, in telling the story of Walt Disney, and so I can live with that. And so, of course, after Sharon died, and then after Lillian died, both of those later got incorporated into, the latest edition of that book. So I still feel it's a very accurate view. But again, I didn't need to write another biography. So basically, the book's divided up into just little short chapters. So there's a chapter about his hobbies. There's a chapter about all the different places that he lived. Including the Smoke Tree Ranch. There's a chapter each for every member of his family. Most people certainly know Roy Disney, but they probably don't know his two older brothers, Herbert and Raymond. You know, and some people may know that Raymond was actually the model for Honest John the Fox in Pinocchio.
Now that I did not know either.
With the cigar and the swagger and all of that. Raymond was an insurance salesman, and he dropped by the Disney studio and tried to bully people into buying insurance from him, which was much higher price than you could get from, a regular insurance company or whatever. And because it's like, well, Walt will like you better if you buy insurance from his brother. Well, it didn't make any difference to Walt, one way or the other. And Raymond didn't drive. Raymond rode a little bicycle with a basket in front. And so I remember Roy O. Disney's son, telling me that he and his wife, would see Raymond, riding on the street to the studio, and he said he looked like the Wicked Witch from Wizard of Oz. And with this big cigar out of his mouth, just puffing away, for that. See, it's tough. You take a look at that Gabler biography, and Gabler did some really good research. The problem I have with the Gabler biography is that he makes an awful lot of assumptions.
Yeah, it was like he was trying to get into Walt's head too much and psychoanalyzing him, where just presenting the facts might have suited him better.
Right, but again, this is like 700 pages. How many people have time to sit down and read 700 pages?
I did.
But even with those 700 pages, there are things you just can't, include, because Walt did so many things, and that's the difficulty with a writer. It's not like, what are you going to write about? It's, what are you going to leave out?
Yeah.
And so in my book, I tried to put in all the things that, people generally left out. The fact that Walt had a box at Hollywood Park and Santa Anita racetrack as well. In fact, Walt owned stock in Hollywood Park racetrack, and he would take celebrities there, like Charlie Chaplin. And Walt tells the story one time he's in the box there at Hollywood Park, and they're and Walt went for the social aspect. He wasn't a gambler by any means. And he's there with Charlie Chaplin, and Charlie Chaplin is starting to act out, a little bit that he's going to be including in his next movie. And Walt says, this race is going on. People have money on the race, and nobody is paying any attention to the horses. They're all looking at this box and seeing Charlie Chaplin, do a little thing with his hand and all of that. So, and Walt was a big baseball fan. He had a box at Dodger Stadium, and he was going to buy a minority interest in the California Angels. So.
Right. Yeah, and this is the thing too, and I think you even touch on it in your book, is that when biographers write about Walt Disney, they generally don't separate the man from his business all that much,
whereas or the brand.
Exactly.
I
or
think
the image, the perception of Walt Disney. Whereas Call Me Walt, what you're doing is focusing on the personal stories, the human stories that, as you said, don't always find their way into the biographies.
I don't think Walt gets enough credit for being one of the first people to really establish a brand. This is what Walt Disney stands for. And when you think of Walt Disney, and so I think some of the attacks that happen is people are attacking that brand, as Walt told Marty Sklar. Marty Sklar used to do an awful lot of the writing, and he came in one day in '65 to Walt with he had written the introduction to the stockholders report, which he usually did, and Walt told Marty, look, I'm not Walt Disney anymore. I do a lot of things that Walt Disney, you know, shouldn't do. I smoke, I drink, you know.
But Uncle Walt was something entirely different.
Yeah, he had created a brand, that branding. But yeah, I like the Walt Disney the person much better than Walt Disney the brand. But what you saw on TV, and I've talked with so many people, what you saw on TV was really pretty much what he was. He
Mm-hmm.
was this avuncular uncle, and friendly and curious about everything, and genuinely liked people, you know. But again, he's a human being, a person who is filming one of those introductions told me, he said, sometimes Walt, because we would film, 6 or 7 introductions at a time, because Walt's time was so valuable, you can't pull him down every single week to film. So you film, 6 or 7 of them in a chunk, so you have those. And he says, so sometimes, Walt would hide his lines, on the set there, because Walt also wore reading glasses,
Mm-hmm.
especially towards the end there. So anyway, he goes over to that bookshelf, by his desk, and he pulls out the book, and out of the book, falls his little cheat sheet with his lines, and he goes, "Oh shit," and there's just dead quiet on the set, right? And Walt only said about 4 or 5 curse words, that he picked up when he was overseas, in France with all these military people, and so Frank Thomas said, they're all pretty mild, right now. Usually they were things like damn and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, they set it up again. He goes and he pulls out the book, and the book is upside down, and he goes, "Oh shit!" And again, it's quiet. They set it up, and he goes. Third time he goes, he pulls out the book, and the book slips out of the dust jacket and goes down to the floor. And Walt looks at the camera, and he goes, "This is getting so bad, I'm probably even going to be able to forget to say, oh shit." And everybody just breaks up and laughs. That Walt never really took himself seriously. He took the work seriously, but he never took himself seriously.
Nice.
We were talking too about it's difficult selling books. I tell people that the hardest thing is not researching and writing a book, but letting people know that a book is available.
Mm-hmm.
And where to get it. And Call Me Walt, people can get at Amazon.com. They can get it themeparkpress.com. Themeparkpress.com will also, list all of the new books that I'm releasing. But this book seems to be selling pretty well, and the reaction I've been getting from people who knew Walt, and there are very few of those people left.
I know, that is so sad.
And so it's getting to that point. The foreword I had done by
Floyd Norman.
Floyd Norman. Oh,
Yeah.
Floyd Norman is just he's not just a Disney legend. This guy's a Disney treasure. He's always going to be 12 years old.
Oh goodness, yes, yes. He's just a big kid.
I got a chance
right.
to interview him again a couple of months ago, and about Sword in the Stone, because he was Milt Kahl's assistant animator on that. And Milt Kahl did Merlin in there, and Madame Mim, and all of that. And so there's nobody left to tell these stories, and nobody seems to be interested in Sword in the Stone. Everybody writes about the Snow White and Little Mermaid, and all of this. And so we're going to get to that point where people are going to go, well, what about Sword in the Sun? And there's nobody around to talk about it. So I talked with him about that.
And the sorcerer's battle between Merlin and Madame Mim is one of my favorite scenes in animation.
Well, it is a lot of people's, and most people don't realize that when Walt Disney World was being built, Fantasyland, they wanted to do different attractions. And one of the attractions they were going to have was a Sword in the Stone ride. So what would have happened is you would have gone in your dark ride vehicle, and the big climax would have been the Wizard's Duel, where they change, and the ending is you see where Mim changes into this, huge polka dotted dragon, and your ride vehicle would spin around her, towards the finale there. But basically, Roy O. Disney stepped in because there was going to be a Mary Poppins a ride there. There was going to be a Headless Horseman ride, and Roy stepped in and he said, "Look, most people on the East Coast are never going to get out to Disneyland. We know that from the research that we've done." But they've seen all these classic rides. They're going to expect some of these classic rides at Walt Disney World. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people think Roy made that decision because, well, look, we're running over budget. This will save money. We already know how to do this ride. We'll do this. But the Imagineers for the Walt Disney World versions just expanded them. So, for instance, the Mr. Toad ride was actually two separate rides that continually converged.
Oh, I know, so and that was the best Toad ride ever.
Yes.
I'm so sorry it went away.
Rolly Crump did some work on that, and he said, I wanted to do that ride so that, a son might come off the ride and go, "Oh, that scene with the chickens, that was so funny." And his father would go, "I didn't see that scene." Mm-hmm. But the scene with the such and such, and the son would go, "That wasn't in there, Dad. You're just making that up." And so Rolly also had come up with an Alice in Wonderland ride, which was it was a dark ride, but you were going to be on a spinning teacup. And
wow! So kind of like a Roger Rabbit kind of concept.
Rolly said what they did is at Imagineering, you never throw anything away, and so years later they pulled out, that concept where they took a teacup off the teacup ride and put it on Pinocchio's Daring Journey and took it through, and the whole thing just worked. And Rolly said, "I told him it would."
But on a totally different ride.
But you see, there's just so much to know. So I'm glad you've brought back the lounge, so that a lot of this information can get out there to people. Because oftentimes, and I'm sure you've been around long enough to see that oftentimes people just go over the same old things. Cut and paste and. No new perspective or no new information.
Yeah.
And there's so much more to discover about Disney.
There really is. And you're doing it every day. In fact, Call Me Walt is your latest, but you've got another book coming out in May. It is
coming out the end of May, more secret stories of Disneyland. So the stories that you don't find in the other Disneyland trivia books or the websites or whatever, and it's one of the toughest books to write because every single person considers themselves a Disneyland expert.
You got a tough audience.
Because they grew up going to Disneyland, and I'll bet many of your listeners can't even remember a time when there was never a Disneyland. But there was.
Yeah. And that, of course, also will be available from Theme Park Press and on Amazon. And we will look forward to it. More secret stories of Disneyland.
And I'll look forward to you inviting me back. And I hope the listeners have enjoyed this little glimpse into some stories that they may not have known.
Jim, an absolute pleasure. It was so great having you back on the show again, and looking forward to more conversations in the future. Again, we'll do the plug. Call Me Walt is your latest. It is available on Amazon.com and ThemeParkPress.com.
Terrific, and thank heavens that you're back, and it just brightens the whole Disney fan community. Thank you, Tim, for doing what you do.
And that will do it for this edition of the newly resuscitated Mouse Castle Lounge. Thank you, Jim Korkis, for being my guest. Make sure you join us again next week when my guest will be singer, actress, and fellow Disney podcaster Tammy Tuckey. We're making some tweaks to how you can connect with us online. The best way to find the Mouse Castle is simply go to the website at themousecastle.com, where you'll find all of our social media links and links to where you can subscribe to the lounge on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all of that. And one thing I've added to the website is what I'm calling the Mouse Castle Sale. Over the years, I have been very fortunate to acquire some really cool Disney items and collectibles. But now, as Elsa said, it's time to let it go. And also, as a struggling voice actor and podcaster, it's just kind of a good idea to have some cash in reserves. So I'm selling off some of the items in my collection. And if you want to see them, just go to themousecastle.com and click the Mouse Castle Sale. Right now, I've got a gently used copy of Bruce Gordon and David Mumford's epic Disneyland book, The Nickel Tour. I've got a 1937 job offer letter on Disney Hyperion Studios letterhead. Very cool item there. I've also got a 1996 edition of the book Walt Disney Imagineering, and it is signed by 9 Disney Imagineers, including Ward Kimball, Marty Sklar, and Tony Baxter. Now, all of these items are real deal, authentic stuff from my personal collection. I'm going to be adding some more stuff later. And also right now, I'm looking into some crowdfunding options. So there's another way that you can support the Mouse Castle Lounge if you are so inclined. And I thank you in advance for your support. Wow. I will say it again. It is good to be back. The Mouse Castle Lounge is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company, but after 18 months, I just like talking about him again. I'm Tim Calloway. It's been a blast as always, so let's do this again real soon. Take care.